Welcome, everyone, to Part B of the UK Government's Science and Innovation Network Digital Society virtual event. I hope you all enjoyed the intermission digital opera by UQ's PhD candidate, Miss Tana Rose. For those of you in the UK or Europe, I'm sure it was a beautiful way to start your morning. I now have the pleasure of introducing the keynote presentation for today's events. Professor Stephen Benford has an extensive resume. He is the Dunford Professor of Computer Science at the University of Nottingham, where he co-founded the Mixed Reality Laboratory. He's director of the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, funded Horizon Centre for Doctoral Training, and director of the university's Smart Products Beacon of Research Excellence. Stephen Benford will give an insight into his collaborations with artists to create, tour, and study interactive artworks for over 25 years.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you. I'll just get this screen sharing business going, and then I hope we're going to be looking goodish. So hopefully you'll all scream at some point if you can't see the images and or hear the videos when I play them. So yes, it's great to be thinking about our future digital selves. I think many people now are familiar with the idea that we have digital selves, that we construct and curate digital identities. But I think we mostly see them as things that we project out of ourselves into the internet and onto social media. And in this talk, I'd like to take a very different view. I'd like to turn it around and look inwards. I'd like to look at our individual bodies, our minds, and our emotions, because I think that's the next frontier for digital technologies, and it's going to transform the self. Technologies such as effective computing try to measure your emotions. Technologies such as brain-computer interfaces deal with your brain activity, possibly your thoughts. Robotics, prosthetics, orthotics, implants are increasingly integrated with your body. I'm going to come at this from a particular direction, and that is to use interactive art as a mirror with which to look at ourselves. I've been working with artists for more than 30 years to create and tour and study interactive artworks. And I do this for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think that entertainment, culture, and art are vitally important aspects of life and the economy that deserve attention from technology developers. But also I'm aware that artists are creative and provocative. They often give people, including the public, experiences that can transform how they see digital technologies. So we're going to follow one particular artist through a series of projects. I'll drill down on just one person and look at some new perspectives, some reflections on our future digital selves. The artist here is pictured centre of the image. It's Brendan Walker. He describes himself as a thrill engineer. Throughout his career, Brendan has been looking to understand but also create thrilling experiences using digital technologies. The first project we did with Brendan was called Thrill Laboratory, and he said, I want to create a personal telemetry system for roller coasters. So when people go on a coaster, data about their emotional experience, their thrill, will be captured. So we built, you can see it here, a helmet with a camera that was always looking at your face and microphones that were listening to what you said, heart rate monitors that were measuring your possible anxiety, and sweat monitors too, and some other sensors that looked at key facial muscles associated with smiling and frowning, and we measured your accelerations and all sorts of stuff, and we captured this data. What Brendan did with the data was he immediately showed it back to the riders. He would either give them their data souvenirs, or he would project it onto screens for audiences to see, and he would have experts to discuss it. And what I've got here is a very rough video clip. I apologise for the quality. It was kind of captured quickly at the first ever outing of Thrill Laboratory, just to give you a sense of what it was like.
148! 148! Get all up in the air!
Okay, Cam, we're going to attach her in. Tell the camera how you feeling right now. I'm well excited actually, and really, really happy that I got picked. This is amazing!
That's enough. She just screams for the rest of the ride. We don't need to hear the rest. You get the picture. So what was Brendan doing? The interesting twist was this idea of showing people back their data. And it was a provocation to storytelling. Whatever you showed people, it could be very ambiguous heart rate data from which you could actually tell relatively little. People would immediately start discussing their emotional experiences and sharing them and reflecting them. And there would be a rich dialogue about the nature of fear and suspense. And so, although that's a really simple thing, it immediately raises one question about our future digital selves. Will computers tell us what we feel? And that's what I sometimes feel that effective computing is trying to do. And it tries to tell us what we feel with a very narrow palette of emotions, boiling it down to just a basic subset? Or will computers help us better understand and discuss and interpret our feelings? So that's question number one. Okay, now, we wanted to go a step further and make our own interactive rides in which your data would actually somehow control the ride. And unfortunately, the UK funding councils, stingy as they are, wouldn't let us build a roller coaster. So we had to settle for something quite a bit smaller. We bought a rodeo bull. I don't know if you've ridden one of these at a party, but you sit atop and a human operator usually moves the controls in an attempt to throw you off. Well, we made a rodeo bull called the Bronchomatic. And the difference here was that it was partially controlled by your breathing. You can see the person in the picture is wearing a chest strap monitor that roughly senses their breathing. The more they breathe, the more the broncho bucks. The harder it is to stay on, the more it pushes back at them, the more they breathe. At the same time, we tell them that to score points, they have to breathe a lot. So it's a crazy game. They're set up with this dilemma about managing their own breathing on this robotic ride. And again, just a quick video to give you a sense of kind of what it's like.
Rider left, are you ready? Yes, 3, 2, 1, go.
So we studied how people experience this ride as we toured it. We looked at their breathing data, we interviewed them, we observed them. And they had a number of interesting strategies for trying to control the experience. Some people tried to control their own bodies and through this control the ride. They said, we know how to control our breathing. We've learned this through martial arts and shooting or yoga. And we think that if we can only control ourselves, we can control the technology. Some people instantly forgot about the whole business of breathing, and they just clung on with their arms and their legs, as you normally do, and hung on for dear life. A very common strategy, and actually the one that I think's led to the most powerful experience, was the natural temptation to hold your breath whenever the ride kicks up to the next level. You feel it moving a bit more, and you can't resist going to try and just keep it under control. And then you sit there, and then you realize you're running out of breath. And then you realize you're going to have to breathe. And then you realize that when you do, you're going to breathe deeply, and the ride is going to kick off to an entirely new level. And that 30 seconds of sitting on top of this robot, reflecting on your own lack of control over yourself, I think was quite a profound moment of suspense for many people who rode this. Okay, the bronchomatic seems, in many ways, perhaps a kind of fairly trivial experience. But actually what's going on is it's an example of human-robot interaction. And the world at the moment is very bothered about autonomous systems, vehicles, service robots, healthcare robots, you name it, that our bodies are increasingly coming into contact with actuated digital technologies. And what Brendan's example shows us is the challenges of contesting control and autonomy with such machines. And we broke this down. We've got much time for the detail here, but we broke down, if you like, the challenge of the Bronco into two dimensions. We said, on the one hand, people are surrendering control. Sometimes they have voluntary control over this thing, but at other times it's involuntary. And the thing here is it's not just control of the Bronco, it's control of their own bodies, because your breathing is only partially under your own control. I'm doing a good job of controlling it as I speak to you now, but I can't stop breathing for more than about 90 seconds before my autonomic system takes over. So our physical bodies are not the same as our cognitive selves, and we can't fully control them. And then there's this question of awareness of control. Do I even know what's going on? Am I aware of the battle that I'm engaged in? So very quickly, this is the holding your breath journey through the Bronco. You start off aware of what's going on and broadly in control. You have there's this little dip, this moment of profound insight for some people, where you become aware of your lack of control, and then you fly off. This is the strategy of hanging on for dear life. You very quickly become unaware of what's going on, and then sooner or later, again, it all becomes involuntary. Everybody ends up in the top right. That's the way the Bronco works. But people take very different emotional journeys through control to get there. So what's the question for your debate? What's the Bronco got to do with these other technologies? Well, I think it's quite simple. Being a digital self implies autonomy. I think that's in part what a self is, an autonomous self. People talk about autonomous systems. They talk about systems having autonomy. But where will human autonomy lie in this? How will digital technologies perturb our ability to control ourselves as well as the technology? And I think in a simple but challenging way, Brendan's experience illuminates that question. One final question, and then we will, I appreciate time's ticking on. So this is one final work from Brendan. Again, the aim was to create another ride. This ride takes an everyday playground swing and it turns it into a thrilling set of amusement rides. You wear a VR headset. We track how much you're swinging, and that drives your motion in a virtual world. So as you're physically swinging, you're moving through this crazy virtual city. And you can choose one of 4 different rides to have a go at. So again, let's take a look at the video of VR Playground. So the first ride, each time you swing back, you just accelerate forward a bit more in the virtual world. So this is about a feeling of speed and acceleration. When you're on the screen.
When it goes black.
Ow! Oh wow.
Second ride, you're underwater and you're essentially a jellyfish, or maybe you're riding on a jellyfish. I was never sure. Each time you swing physically, you pump up in the air a little bit, or the water a little bit more. It's a vertigo ride, height ride.
Oh, I feel like a jellyfish.
Third ride's a bit more zany. You're jumping between the rooftops, buildings in the city. Each time you swing, you jump from one roof to the next. Yeah,
Oh, that was even more bonkers.
And last up, Walker, a hardcore ride. This one really is a tricky one. You're in the belly of a giant robot that's walking through the city. You've got some nasty, twisting motions going on. So we spent a long time analysing what was going on here, and the most surprising thing is it works. The number of people, when you present them with the idea, say, that's terrible, people are going to be instantly sick. Everyone knows that's the problem with VR. And as the slide suggests, people have got very different tolerances for rides. That's generally true at a theme park anyway. And the feedback and the observations are that, most people can find one or more of the rides that work for them. What's the wider point here is about something we would call sensory misalignment. What's going on in VR Playground is your body and mind are getting a whole bunch of sensory information. And Brendan is interfering with some of that. And he does it in a way that it doesn't line up perfectly. And this puts you in an unusual experience space. Now, most of the world thinks that the senses should be aligned. In everyday life, it seems kind of like a weird thing if your senses aren't aligned. People who are developing virtual reality are spending gazillions on trying to build force feedback devices that perfectly align what you touch with what you see, with what you hear. Everyone thinks that's how it should work. Brendan says, well, no, actually. If you fool people's senses, you can create very powerful illusions, in this case, of thrill and speed and acceleration. Out of interest, if you look at the research literature, there are some examples of something that sits in the middle, where you can misalign people's senses and change their behavior without them being aware of it. If I put you in a virtual world and I show you a straight path, it's sort of infinitely long, and I tell you to walk along it, and then every now and then I change the angle of the world in your headset by just a degree or so, so small that you don't notice, you will follow it, and I can make you walk in a circle in my lab, but you will think you're walking in a straight line. This is called redirected walking. And there's a whole bunch of other sort of psychological tricks that you can kind of carry out to change people's experience of the world. So what's the question? Well, I've phrased it a bit negatively here, and I wish I could have found a kind of more balanced phrasing for can we trust augmented sensory experiences? By augmenting or manipulating some senses and carefully juxtaposing them with others, we can clearly give people powerful experiences, and yet at the same time, they may not be aware of what we're doing. And that raises a whole bunch of questions, again, about the nature of the self. If we can't trust our senses at a bodily and cognitive level, then what's the nature of the self? So, okay, I think it's probably time for me to wrap up and take some questions. We've kind of followed the work of just one particular artist, and there are many other artists who are doing great work with body technologies, AI, you name it. And very often those works raise profound questions when you start to think about them. Brendan's work, for us as researchers at least, has raised three, we think, quite deep questions about our future digital selves. One of the reasons, we've come to characterize a lot of what goes on with this interactive art as being about uncomfortable interactions. Brendan in particular, by exploring thrill as a sensation, takes people to a space that isn't always comfortable. And that is the nature of the theme park, the thrill ride, the horror film, when we engage with them. And we do those things in part to be entertained, but sometimes to be enlightened as well. There is a long history of people engaging with discomfort as part of religious practices or rituals or all sorts of things. So I think one of the things that interactive art does as a mirror is it cautiously and hopefully ethically uses discomfort to confront us with questions about our future digital selves. Thank you. If you'd like to know more, there's also a book that describes a good number of these examples, and you're very welcome to buy a copy from some local online bookstore. Thank you very much for your time. Happy to take questions. Thank you.
That was just, am I off mute now too?
You are?
Okay, good. Across a couple of platforms, and Rachel is translating from YouTube into the chat here. But just you were leaning into this a little bit at the end of this talk, Steve, and the experiments that you're doing actually put me to mind of some of the work that Christian Knoll used to do around cities. And what he used to do is he used to strap people up with your machines are fancier. I will say that. Fancier. So this was an earlier moment, but he used to put sensory devices on people and send them into cities. And the goal of doing this was to try to understand where cities were exciting and where cities had dead zones. And what was great, so he would then map. It was early sort of geo-mapping of city spaces. And what was great about these experiments is that over sending out a number of people, it was quite easy to map the dead zones in the cities, the parts of the city that elicited no responses from a range of people who were kitted out with these sensory devices. But what was not so clear was how to interpret the parts of the city that elicited a response. So for instance, you could have a space that elicited, you could see heart rates spiked, breathing became faster, but it wasn't clear whether that was an excited response or a fearful response. And so you were leaning into this a little bit at the end by talking about whether and I feel my experience of a roller coaster is extremely similar. I'd be the person you'd mute the entire time because it would be nothing but screaming. And then I get off and say it was amazing because the experience of scaring yourself is a pleasurable experience. And I wonder about the kind of inherent confusion in those categories and how you think through that in this work.
Christian Knoll's work is fantastic. I would encourage anyone to look at it. And part of what he did was this real ambiguity of taking this fuzzy data and crystallizing it by printing it out on an Ordnance Survey map of a town in the UK, which made it look like hard scientific data. And yet it was really open to interpretation. And that was really a lot of what I was trying to say in the first point was that, some of the things that worry me about effective computing and machine learning in relation to emotions isn't that it isn't possible to determine something about someone's emotional state from an algorithm or even useful, but it just reduces the palette. It tries to reduce the ambiguity in the palette of our emotional experience to something very small, at least as it's done today. Whereas emotion is about ambiguity and debate and interpretation and reflection, and every time you reflect, you change what you thought before. So yeah, my call is to work like Christians, that because it's so super ambiguous, actually opens up the space of emotional discussion as a human being.
Exactly, and for all kinds of things about how we experience, potentially it's an experience about age, right? At different times in one's life, one feels, stairs are scarier to me at this age than they were 20 years ago. I'm just going to come out and say that. So yeah, exactly. That's really, okay. I have a question here from Katie Macker. She writes this, she says, I'm curious about the early example with the bucking machine. What was the outcome of those who were trained to control their breath? It says something about training and how we exercise control.
So, I mean, the outcome for everybody was you fall off the Bronco. And I mean, you don't want to be on there for longer than 2 minutes. It then becomes an unpleasant experience. So at an individual level, everybody loses. The question is, what do you experience along the way? And what do you end up reflecting on? I can't say whether people who did try breath control lasted longer than the others. I feel I ought to be able to look that up, but I can't remember the answer. We possibly weren't so, if you like, so bothered about who wins. So I guess my point was, I think the outcome for people where it really works is a reflection or an understanding about your lack of control over yourself and the world. I'm not saying everybody reached that conclusion, by the way. Some people just rode the Bronco and enjoyed it, but I think that's the message. And I think people who know how to control their own breathing have probably already got a deeper insight into that, because I suspect they've spent more time thinking about the challenges of regulating yourself. Yeah, and then the question is, what happens when that comes up against technology? How does technology help us regulate ourselves or otherwise?
David McCready is fascinated by the swing piece and the opportunities to trial this at the local park. He wants to know if he can download it. So me too. I've got an Oculus Rift. Can we download this somewhere?
So Brendan, his company certainly does now tour this work. I mean, we toured it as a research project for quite a long time, and I think it's certainly now gone commercial. I believe they were thinking of producing a downloadable version, but honestly don't know where they are with that. So the company is Studio Go, Brendan Walker. It may be available. There was certainly, we did produce a version on the Gear VR that you could train to work on pretty much any swing. So it's certainly possible.
Studio Go?
Yeah.
Good to know. Can I ask a question about the metaverse?
Yes, please do.
I think you just recently write a piece in The Conversation about the metaverse?
I did, yes. We spent.
Who owns it? How afraid should we be?
Afraid of
Is
what?
it coming for us? Should I cancel my Facebook account?
Well, that is a very big question. There's kind of a couple of
but seriously, I think you said there were 5 things that we really ought to know about the metaverse.
I mean, I think there's a couple of angles on it that help, I think. Firstly, the recognition that the idea of the metaverse has been around for a very long time. It was coined in Neil Stephenson's book Snow Crash in '92, so it's a sort of science fiction. But before that, William Gibson had been talking about cyberspace in his cyberpunk novels, and a very similar concept. Now, since then, there have been various ways of trying to invent and roll out the metaverse, as in large part as technologies mature. You might argue it's already with us. One view of the metaverse is if you take Gibson's view of cyberspace, it's already here. That's what the internet is. And then the difference with the metaverse is whether it's in 3D, and some people would argue whether you need to slap a headset on to experience it. So one argument isn't that it's coming for us, but it's already come for you and you're in it here in Zoom. And it's perhaps not such a big difference to experience bits of it as a 3D thing. I think there are other people who disagree with that, say very fundamentally it has to be 3D and we all have to be wearing headsets. I'm happy to have that debate, but I'm personally very skeptical about that position. Don't know if that answered the question. It's a bit of a ramble.
It is. I kind of want to know which of the four is your favorite. I think I would like the jellyfish, but I'll ask an audience question first, which is someone says that they're curious about the way that we can trick subjects. Yeah, I'm curious about the way that we can trick subjects. Can you comment on how advanced that research is? It strikes me similar to optical illusions, but also a little bit different.
Yeah, so I think there's clearly a lot of understanding in psychology, neuroscience, and various other disciplines about how the senses do and don't integrate. So, you know, there's many years of research into how vision works with sound. You know, lots of research into things like motion sickness, for example, which in part may be due to some aspects of sensory misalignment, although not entirely. So, you know, a lot of understanding there. And of course, visual illusions and others are a key part of psychology. When you get into digital technologies, then, you know, virtual reality is a playground for this kind of cross-sensory work. You know, I alluded to some of the work in virtual reality about redirected walking. There's also other work that shows experimentally that you can fool people by visually making them have to move objects when they lift up a virtual object in a virtual world, by having to move them just a bit further than they should. And people will then report that as the sensation of weight. So you can make people feel that things are heavy. So that's another illusion that stands up in the lab. I think Brendan's kind of work, you know, his take on very deliberately misaligning the senses, I think that's relatively new. I mean, we published that a couple of years ago, and, you know, I think at least in the kind of virtual reality work, that's less thought about, the idea that you can still create an illusion, even if people know, you know, clearly when you're on the swing, you know something weird is going on. Yeah, so I think that's a newer take on it.
And it's interesting because it strikes me that there are therapeutic applications as well, right? So I think about the work that's done on the use of mirrors to help people struggling with phantom limb syndrome. And so there's a question about whether redirected walking can help people who are relearning to walk. So could there be a rehabilitative element to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I don't know the answer. I don't know whether that's been tried. Intuitively, it feels, yeah, any experience where you can get people to walk, perhaps through virtual worlds in different ways, yeah, sounds really interesting. I don't know if it does anything dangerous to your sense of walking. There's no evidence that I've seen that it does, but, you know, there is clearly some slight mismatch between what you think you're doing and what you are doing physically that, you know, I'd want to look at in that situation. I mean, the reason people have done it mostly, by the way, is just the lack of space in virtual reality installations. You know, at the moment we can have room-sized walk-around installations, not infinite fields, and so it's a trick to get around that. So yeah, I think that would be great to consider the potential and possible drawbacks of that for rehab.
And it's interesting, right? Like I was listening to your language, dangerous, and there is a moral valence. There is a moral valence to the use of these, right? So it's an interesting question whether, you know, if we are the language of tricking people, right? Tricking people for good. What if we're using these kinds of, I don't know, are they sleights of, if they're not sleights of hand, are they sleights of body, sleights of vision, sleights of reality? Yeah. Good, right? To change energy consumption, behaviors of that sort, or rehabilitation or something like that.
And how we deal with those questions and how we see them is different in different fields. So, you know, the notion of creating illusions and tricking people is part and parcel of culture and entertainment. It doesn't mean that it's always done ethically or rightly, by the way. You can still get it wrong. But, you know, it is accepted when you go and watch a film that it's actually kind of not real, and you're, you know, what you're playing, you're suspending disbelief. What happens when you transfer those practices into other domains where people don't have the same understanding, into healthcare, for example, or policy, then I think you do hit a set of issues. And it's certainly a danger with my talk that, you know, sometimes when I talk about uncomfortable interactions, you might read it as a recipe for going out and just doing this stuff everywhere. And that's not what I would say. You know, I think translating things out of the art world into the wider world is a difficult proposition that needs a lot of thinking about.
It's been absolutely fascinating, your talk and the conversation afterwards. Thank you so much. And thanks to the audience too for your participation in this Q&A afterwards, because I think it's expanded the scope of our thinking on all of the interactions between technology, art, our perceptions of reality. There is I have to say that redirected walking, that experience of changing it a little bit and walking it in a circle, I've always personally called that London, but that might just be me, my experience of it. No, listen, it's been absolutely great.
Lovely, thank you. It's been a great pleasure. Yeah, enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So before we move on to our next segment for the Great Debate, I would like to share with you all that we are saving quite an extraordinary performance piece for our final segment, and we do invite you to stay with us after the debate so as not to miss out. I will also tell you that it's quite a short piece as well, and so it's not like we're inviting you to stay for another hour or something like that. It's just a few minutes, and it is really going to be worth your time. Now, I'm very excited to introduce the Great Debate. And to do this, I would invite Mr. David McCready, OBE, the Chief Executive of the Australian British Chamber of Commerce, to adjudicate the Great Debate. So welcome, Mr. McCready.
Thank you very much, Heather, and welcome everybody. Well, what a fantastic speech and session with Stephen just now. I was fascinated, as you heard. I asked the question, can I put this on my kids on the swing set on this, on this coming weekend? I'm keen to see what happens. I was very interested to note that sick was on almost all of the word clouds that he presented on screen as well, in quite large letters, I might add. But look, it's been a fantastic set of sessions so far today, and it's my great pleasure over about the next hour to moderate the Great Debate. And as you'll remember from your high school or university debating days, we've got an affirmative and negative team of 3 each who will take on this important challenge, I think. The proposition, the hypothesis tonight is this House believes that digitisation is reshaping humanity for the better. I'm interested to see who on this can really drive a strong argument for the negative. That's my personal opinion. But there'll be some great arguments on both sides, I'm sure. And I really look forward to hearing from each of the speakers during the course of the evening. And I really encourage you to take part. There is an app. There will be on screen now, hopefully, is a QR code. Grab your phone. Get ready to snap it if you haven't already so that you can vote. And I'll be announcing the winner at the end of the evening. But we'll have 3 speakers from each side. I'll tell you about who's going to come in what order in a moment. Following that, we'll have Joe Holland, who's my colleague. I run the Australian British Chamber of Commerce based here in Australia. My colleague Joe Holland, who runs the Australia UK Chamber based over there in London, will give some thoughts at the end of the presentations from both sides. And then we'll announce the winner, and then I'll pass back to Heather at the end of the evening before that magnificent performance that she spoke about just a moment ago. So I'm not sure if the QR code has been up on screen yet for people. If not, I'm sure we can put it into the chat, and we'll find a way to make sure that you can vote. So we have 6 very distinguished speakers, and given that I may have letters after my name but no professor or associate professor before my name, I feel very, very humbled to be in such august company this evening. For the affirmative, we'll have Dr. Skye Doherty, who is a lecturer at the School of Communication and Arts at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences and Global Change Scholars Program Coordinator for the Graduate School at UQ. I think you've probably got the award for the longest title today, but fantastic to have you along. Associate Professor The second affirmative speaker will be Dr. Richard Seow, Director of Ageing Research at King's College London. Terrific to have you. Welcome and good morning. And the third speaker for the affirmative will be Associate Professor Claire Sullivan, who is the Associate Professor Conjoint at the Centre for Health Services Research, the Faculty of Medicine at UQ. And welcome along to you, Claire. Terrific to see you again. I know many of us saw you earlier on today, so thank you very much for being part of the session today. On the negative side, we'll have Associate Professor Elizabeth Stevens, who is Australian Research Council Future Fellow. That sounds incredibly difficult to be on the negative side, but we'll leave that there. At the Institute for Advanced Studies in Humanities at the University of Queensland. The second speaker for the negative will be Professor Toby Walsh, Laureate Fellow and Scientia Professor of Artificial Intelligence at the School of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of New South Wales. Toby, welcome to you. And our third speaker for the negative, and we'll have the last word, is Professor Catherine Gelber, Head of School at the School of Political Science and International Studies at UQ. So that, ladies and gentlemen, will be the lineup. We'll go affirmative, negative, as you remember. They will have 5 minutes each. I will be giving them some little hand signals in the background to make them aware when they're at 3 minutes, and then at 5 minutes, we're going to cut them off. It's not me, it's the production team. They're going to do a great job, I'm sure. And then you'll find me fumbling to catch the ball and keep running with it as we introduce the next speaker. But I know there's lots to get through, and the last person you need to hear from is me. So I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Skye Doherty to open the case for the affirmative. Dr. Skye.
Thank you for the introduction. Adjudicator, opponents, guests. Digital technologies augment and enhance human ingenuity. They are the means by which we share information, care for the weak, feed our growing populations, and reduce our impact on the world. Digitisation is the process of converting physical information into bits and bytes. The tools we developed to interact with digital information make it possible for us to store vast amounts of data, to analyse it, to make complex calculations, and to communicate across time and space. This is the stuff of magic and science fiction, and it's shaping the way we interact with each other and our world, overwhelmingly for the better. Thanks to social and mobile technologies, we can speak, see, and write to several people all at once, in real time, across vast distances. We're doing this right now. Thanks to machine learning, we can train algorithms to help health workers diagnose diseases more accurately and efficiently. And thanks to virtual reality, we can experience what it's like to live with colour blindness or be in a war zone. And this means we can empathise more deeply and understand the lives of others. There are thousands of examples like this of how digital technologies are augmenting work, enhancing our creativity, and reshaping humanity for the better. But let me offer 2 cases that illustrate quite clearly the benefits of digital technologies in our everyday life: sharing knowledge and guaranteeing our food systems. It would be folly to diminish the positive impact digital technologies have had on learning and knowledge sharing. The past 2 years are testament to the value of the computer hardware, social software, and digital archives that have allowed us practically overnight to move our classrooms, our workplaces, and our research institutes into cyberspace. Despite a global pandemic, we've continued to educate children, deliver goods and services, create cultural artefacts, and share ideas. And this is not a stopgap measure. The OECD says digital technologies have allowed us to find new answers about what, how, and where people learn, and has elevated the role of teachers from imparting knowledge to co-creating it. The ability to learn, share, create is fundamental to humanity. Digital technologies enhance that capability. Yet more fundamental, though, is our ability to feed ourselves. Droughts and floods are changing the land and challenging our farming methods. In Australia, the millennium drought devastated parts of our food system to the point where productivity in some places is not back to where it was beforehand. Once we would have increased production simply by using more land and water, but this is no longer an option. In Australia today, farmers use digital technologies to know when fruit trees have had enough water, when a cow is injured, and when a paddock needs fertiliser. This information means they can make better decisions about how to use the land and improve yields. There's estimates that these kinds of techniques can boost agricultural production by 25%. In a world where the population is expected to grow significantly, natural resources are becoming scarcer, and climate changing dramatically, we need to produce much more with less, and digital technologies make that possible. Our opponents will likely attempt to convince you that digitisation undermines our humanity because it facilitates surveillance, embeds bias in algorithms, amplifies misinformation, and consolidates technological might and therefore political and economic power in a handful of companies. They're right. But it's not digitisation that is the cause of this. It's us, humans. We've created amazing digital tools, but we have failed to develop the systems, the regulations and laws that ensure these tools serve the public interest. We have chosen to commercialise the internet. This is on us. But we can make different choices. Digital technologies can be designed to enhance democracy, improve equality, and address environmental challenges. We can create technologies that are accessible, ethical, repairable, sustainable, and biodegradable. We just need to choose to do so. Thank you.
Well said, Sky. I think there's some great content there to lead off the conversation this evening. So thank you very much for your contribution. I won't try and guide people along the journey, so I'll try and be as impartial as I can as we move forward. But thank you very much, Sky, for opening the debate this evening. It's now my great pleasure to welcome the first speaker for the negative, Associate Professor Elizabeth Stevens, to open her side's rebuttal and
Thank you so much, and thank you, Sky Doherty, for her opening gambit as well in this great debate. So, in many ways, taking a negative position in relation to digitisation at this point in the 21st century, as I am doing today, feels a little bit like arguing against electricity or the steam engine in the 19th. Digitisation is both a fact of contemporary life and it's the great engine of contemporary culture. And the first affirmative speaker outlined very well some of the positives of this. But in my brief response, I will argue that just as the first great wave of industrialisation in the 19th century brought about much social, economic, and environmental devastation, so are many of the transformations caused by digitisation in the present day emphatically not shaping humanity for the better. In this respect, I take a different approach from that of the first affirmative speaker, who saw something magical in the digital and its inexorable extension across everyday life. But if digitisation is shaping humanity for the better, I ask you, why do I, a human, feel so much worse when I spend large amounts of time online or in digital space? Over the past 2 years, the pandemic has provided us with ample opportunity to discover what a sudden exponential growth of digitisation looks like. We have found ourselves in the midst of a vast social experiment in which we have had to learn how to work, socialise, exercise, attend weddings and funerals, manage all the aspects of our life online. Where the previous speaker identified benefits in such things as the rise of computational systems, I contend that the forces of digitisation and the best interests of humanity are not always convergent, but on the contrary, often deeply opposed. We see this in two key ways, which I would briefly discuss here. The first is that living online is clearly toxic for human bodies and brains. And we know this because when virtual life gets too much for us, we say we need a digital detox. But you don't need to detox from something that is shaping your life for the better. Sometimes it feels like we're going to be trapped inside these little Zoom boxes forever, trying to avoid the disconcerting sight of our own faces on the screen in front of us. Online life is filled with cognitive contortions like this. So if digitization is shaping humanity for the better, why does living online make me feel so sad, as though the camera is stealing little pieces of my soul every time I log on? Virtual catch-ups with friends and family, but no possibilities of hugs, can leave us feeling empty afterwards. Why does walking on a beach or in a park after too much screen time feel like such an antidote to online life? Don't we only need antidotes for things that are poisonous? The second reason that digitisation is not shaping humanity for the better, which my colleagues on the negative team will explore and expand on in more detail, is that the best interests of digitisation and those of humanity are in fact often actively opposed. We saw this during the great age of mechanisation in the 19th century, and we're seeing it again now at the dawn of the age of digitisation. Left to their own devices, these systems will prioritise their own proliferation and optimisation at the expense of all else. The 18-hour workdays on factory assembly lines that fueled the Industrial Revolution are back. They're back in the digital factories of the 21st century. They're back in the platform economies. They're back in surveillance capitalism. And they're back in the offices and emails that come home with us to be answered at night on our mobile phones. The social, physical, environmental, and economic consequences of this are enormous. But none of them, I put it to you, could be said to be shaping humanity for the better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And when you drew back to the previous centuries, I was also thinking of King Canute trying to hold back the tide, a very good, solid British story for an Australia-UK environment. But thank you very much for putting your case. I have to say, after the speakers, I'm feeling completely conflicted, and I have no idea which way to turn next. So I'm going to move on straight away to our second speaker for the affirmative, Dr. Richard Seow. Pleasure to have you with us this morning, your time in the UK, and welcome to all of our friends who are joining us from the other side of the world. We look forward to your presentation and hearing how you'll take this case forward for the affirmative. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Adjudicator, esteemed colleagues and audience. I put it to you that digitization is in all of our lives and we are benefiting from it. We know it. The negative team has highlighted the toxic culture of the online virtual world. And this is something new. However, we need to see that digitization has been part of human culture from the beginning of time, and in prehistory, we have needed to digitize. Even the cavemen before, they were making evaluations, risk evaluations. Were they surviving? Were they extending both their lifespan and also their health span? The pressures of finding food, the pressures of escaping things that would eat them. This has all involved digital decision making. However, coming to our current situation, we've been through 2 years of heavy reliance on the benefits of our digital metaverse, you could say. This new digital frontier, which I'm putting to you, is not so new. What we need to see is that we haven't been trapped in a virtual Zoom world. We are benefiting this morning or this evening from connectivity between Australia and the UK. So many of us across vast distances have been able to connect through the benefits of having digital technologies. I think in Australia, you understand that a lot better. Previously, you've relied on flying doctors. Now we have digital virtual doctors who can be on call 24/7. The negative team referred to a toxic culture of digitization where we need to detoxify. But I put it to you also that this has kept our mental and also physical health at a stage that we have benefited. We have been tracking the number of steps that we haven't taken over the past 2 years, and we've been alerted to that fact from digital technologies. We've been able to contact loved ones through digital technologies in the presence of the pandemic. And also, we have benefited. I think humanity has actually progressed because we've been much more aware of the pressures and the needs across the globe. Without digital tools, you could say 24/7, wouldn't have been possible for us to be aware of the spread of the pandemic, making use of novel technologies, especially in the third world. They have learned a lot. We have been able to provide digital tools, digital technologies to the third world as well. And you could argue, coming back to history, even the printing press was a digital tool that we all benefited from. How we could transfer knowledge in a sustainable and also much more efficient way. So the arguments I would like to make this morning are really from history through to today and also the future. We are entering a new digital frontier, and there has indeed been exponential growth in the awareness of technologies. We have learnt a lot. It's education. We are all educators, and we are all in the learning journey together. And it's the digital tools that have enabled us to, as the man on the street, to learn about what mRNA vaccines are. This is a term that would have been unheard of, but because of the necessity of turning to digital tools to learn, to be better informed, so that we can take positive steps for our own health and wellness. It's not that we've been fighting disease, but we've only been able to access health and wellness, for example, through our supermarkets. And it's through the supermarkets that we've even been able to track what we are buying, what we are eating, and how we have been growing more healthily. So with that, I put it to you that digitization is beneficial for humanity, and we should embrace it, as we have all benefited in every aspect of our lives. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Richard, and thank you for progressing very solidly, I think, the case for the affirmative, and to rebut and bring forward some of the themes drawn out by the first speaker, Elizabeth Stevens. Toby Walsh, I am delighted to invite you to speak as the second speaker for the negative.
Thank you. Our honourable opponents have argued that digitalisation has happened throughout history. To remind you that collecting taxes was when we first started to digitalise our lives. Our opponents have also argued that digitalisation has made us more productive. That's indeed very true. But those gains have not been shared. The millionaires and billionaires have got richer, and the rest of us have been left behind. Adjusted for inflation, median wages have not increased since I was a young boy in the UK growing up in the 1970s. That's not the growing pains of new technology. That's 50 years of digital reality. I want to put forward, though, two of my own arguments why digitization is not reshaping humanity for the better. My first argument is the problem that turning people into zeros and ones is that zeros and ones can easily be hacked. And the uncomfortable truth is the human brain is very easily hacked. We'd like to think that we're perfectly rational decision makers, but the reality is far from this. Behavioral psychology is a catalogue of ways in which the human brain makes irrational decisions. We buy products we don't need. We vote for people who don't advance our interests. And digitization is putting the way we hack human brains on steroids. Unfortunately, evolution hasn't equipped our pleasure-seeking brains to resist the persuasive and personalized digital marketing. Digital tools mean that we can now micro-target individuals. The internet you see is unique to you. It's tailored to your particular interests, your particular politics, and your particular pleasures. You see a completely different internet to the one that I see. And in the past, if an advertiser told untruths, we'd all see them for what they are. That's no longer the case. So that's my first argument. Digital tools are perfect for hacking our brains. And my second argument is connected. It's that digitization is collecting lots of data with which to do that hacking. We're all spending more and more time online with our smartphones and other devices that are tracking us constantly. That tracking data, of course, is immensely valuable for deciding how to hack our brains. Everything we do, everything we read, everything we watch, it's known to digital advertisers who use that information to target our weaknesses. That's why digital data has been called the new oil. It's lubricating surveillance capitalism. We've already seen great harms committed by being able to hack how people think. Would Trump have been elected without the misuse of social media to discourage Black people and other minorities from coming out to vote? And would genocide have taken place in Myanmar without Facebook to incite violence? Studies suggest that people who log off social media get happier. Young people, especially young girls, are facing a crisis around body image, eating disorders, and self-esteem brought about by social media. And social media is polarizing our political discourse, dividing, not uniting us through echo chambers and fake news. Authors like George Orwell have warned us of this future. But Orwell got one thing wrong. It's not Big Brother, it's not people watching people. We saw the limits of that in East Germany. No, it's computers watching people. We can do that on a national scale, at speed, scale, and cost that humans cannot match. And digitalization is bringing that world of 1984 into existence today. You only have to look at how the Chinese authorities are using digital tools to surveil and suppress the Uyghurs. That's a fate that awaits us all if we're not careful. The last 2 years have been a difficult and challenging time as we've tackled the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. But we've learned one important truth during this time. The thing that we've missed most are things like nature, our social contacts, the physical presence of other people. These are the things that give us true satisfaction and meaning, not artificial zeros and ones in some digital metaverse. No thank you, Mark Zuckerberg. Give me real people, not legless avatars. As Elizabeth was arguing, we want the feeling of sun on our face, the wind in our hair, to hug again our friends and families, to share food and laughter. Concrete, real experiences, not abstract, digital ones. Thank you.
Well, a very compelling case that you laid before us, Toby, I have to say. I almost felt like I was getting shivers down the back of my spine at the end there when I remembered the feeling of a warm hug. I'm a million miles away from my family this evening. I'm actually coming to you from Adelaide. I know that feeling of a nice hug certainly is welcomed by all. But that's not to say that there's not good things about the digital world. And I'm pleased to hand over to Associate Professor Claire Sullivan to wrap together the affirmative of the negative. Claire, over to you. Take it forward. You need to unmute yourself. Sorry, Claire.
Mr. Adjudicator and dear colleagues, it is clear that digital technologies are shaping society for the better. Please note that I'm not proposing that they're perfect. Many of the criticisms of digital technology leveraged by my esteemed colleagues are indeed true. We would all rather the sun on our faces than the wind on our back. However, without digital technologies, we would not be able to connect, continue to educate, search Medline, create new knowledge, and share that knowledge at scale. So this side of the House accepts the criticisms posed by our colleagues. on the negative side. However, on the balance, we propose that digital technologies are shaping humanity for the better, not the perfect. Our first, point is that it is important to remember that digital technologies affect different people in different ways. Our first speaker on the opposition highlighted that she was receiving Zoom fatigue and was feeling a little bit worn out after her day using Zoom technology, which I agree with. However, digital technologies such as Zoom are saving lives. I work as a doctor in Australia's largest tertiary hospital, and during the pandemic, we have used Zoom in maternity wards to deliver babies stuck. We have used Zoom to guide surgeons isolated in rural Queensland to complete complicated operations. We have used Zoom to deliver chemotherapy to people who are isolated and away from their families. We have used Zoom to actually guide inexperienced junior doctors in rural emergency departments to secure an airway. I agree that we get Zoom fatigued, but on the balance, it's very clear to see that digitisation is saving lives, and to me, that's worth some Zoom fatigue. Our other opponent, I think quite rightly, is exhibiting some fear around the unintended consequences of digitisation, and I share those same fears. We're not proposing that digitisation is perfect, but on the balance, the lives saved and the knowledge shared outweighs those fears that we have with any new technology. Listening to him speak, I'm reminded of a lecture that I had during my training about the worries that doctors had during the introduction of the thermometer. They were told that the thermometer would de-skill nurses, would take away the roles of doctors, would create a surveillance of the patients that had never been seen before. And this is in 17th century Edinburgh. It's interesting that we are talking exactly the same way in 2021. So I think it is absolutely right that we should have our concerns, and there will be unintended consequences. However, the balance is that digitisation is shaping our society for the better. I'll now go over our arguments from our side. Our first speaker really talked about the ability to learn and share knowledge as a fundamental way to shape society for the better. She agreed that there are quite unintended negative consequences of digital technology which we must manage. But it is important to remember that perfection is the enemy of done. Whenever you introduce new technologies such as a new surgery, new chemotherapy, there will be side effects. That doesn't mean you don't get chemotherapy. It means that we manage those side effects. We can't be absolutist about any new treatment, whether it's digital technology, surgery, or chemotherapy. All have side effects, all have negative consequences. It doesn't mean we don't do them. I'm not sure where this absolutism around technology has come from, but when the benefits are framed against the side effects in the same way as chemotherapy or surgery, I think it becomes clearer that digitisation is shaping our society for the better. Our second speaker talked through the accessibility and the way that digital technology has kept us online, connected and communicating during the pandemic. It's been able to minimise some of the inequities through transmitting technologies and care across vast distances. So, I will now sum up our argument. It is increasingly a complex world in which we live. It is sometimes impossible to communicate and understand the complexity of things around us. When considering digital health, I think of the good, the bad, and the ugly. In our summary, I would like to say that it is important that you accept fear as a part of life, specifically the fear of change. I have gone ahead with change despite the pounding in my heart that says turn back by Erica de Jong. And I think that's because there is good in digitisation. It will shape our society. There are negative consequences which we as sophisticated individuals can manage. And so I am pleased to propose that digitisation is shaping our society for the better. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Claire. I was reminded in your closing comments there when you said you went forward despite being afraid of every time I've gone on a roller coaster in my life. that's probably a fresh memory from from the presentation earlier this evening, but certainly something that really resonates about everything that you've put forward there. So I really look forward to hearing Catherine Gelber, Professor Catherine Gelber, the head of school at the School of Science and International Studies at UQ, for the last word in the debate. Good luck. Your time starts now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adjudicator, colleagues, and the audience. So the affirmative team has recognised many of our arguments. Thank you, we're very grateful for that. But they also made a few that I can't help but go past. The first speaker for the affirmative said that VR has the capacity to make people empathise more deeply. With respect, there's really not a lot of evidence that that's what digitisation is doing, as I will show. She also said that we could just choose to design our way out of the problems that we face ourselves with. And respectfully, again, I beg to differ, and I will again outline why. The second speaker for the affirmative talked a lot about connectivity, saying that it's easier for people to connect. And as I and our team's other members have pointed out, some people are forming communities, but this is at great cost to others, other individuals, other communities, and the well-being of many people who are using the online sphere. The first speaker for the affirmative also said information sharing is easier. Yes, that can be true, but again, as I will clarify, at what cost? The costs of the forms of information sharing that are prioritised in the digitisation era are being unfairly and disproportionately dealt out. It is overwhelmingly the vulnerable and the marginalised who experience the costs that others benefit from with digitisation. We recognise, for example, the very good medical uses that the third speaker of the affirmative spoke about. But she said that on balance, that makes digitisation good for humanity. Again, with respect, on balance, I don't think that that conclusion can be drawn. The issues that we've talked about in our team are not fears, they're facts. Surveillance is a fact. Data collection, sometimes illegal data collection by very significant major governments on millions or billions of people is a fact. The use of that data to manipulate us is a fact. Those things are not fears. I'm going to move now to outline two further substantive arguments for the negative case that I hope will finish the argument off. The first is that digitisation means that we have no choice but to participate in an online environment that facilitates, enables and exacerbates harms, especially on the most vulnerable. And the second is that we cannot somehow create a regulatory environment to solve these problems. Instead, we need to recognise that these problems are inherent to the nature of the medium itself. So to my first point, digitisation means we have no choice but to participate in an online environment that facilitates, enables and exacerbates harms, especially on the most vulnerable. Digitisation is unavoidable. In January this year, there were 4.95 billion active internet users worldwide, equivalent to 62.5% of the global population, and this grows by 10% per year. Many of our daily activities require us to be online. Just think of the QR codes and check-ins that have been mandatory during the pandemic. We use the online world for our medical records, interaction with government departments, banking, bill paying, enrolling to vote, everything. But this is also a harmful environment. There's no doubt that digitisation facilitates, enables and magnifies speech-based harms because it enables rapid and very widespread dissemination of speech into people's personal devices, targeted at their personal feeds through algorithms. More people come into contact with speech-based harms, and those disposed to engage in it do so from the anonymity of a keyboard and at lightning speed. I don't only mean that people get nasty things said to them, although there's plenty of that, with politicians like Julia Banks and Nicole Flint being targeted with vile slurs and threats and having to resign from public life. We also have speech that discriminates against people, like anti-Semitism, racism, anti-Muslim hatred, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia and gender vilification. A 2020 e-safety report on online hate speech reported that 15% of the population in Australia and New Zealand had been directly exposed to online hate speech in only the previous 12 months. In late 2019, 18 United Nations Special Rapporteurs, 5 independent experts and 3 working groups released a statement expressing concerns about the global increase in online hate speech and incitement to discrimination. And of course, those types of speech also pave the way for other types of harm, such as radicalisation, violent extremism and terrorism. The Christchurch attack in 2019 was a perfect example. A single gunman radicalised online, live-streamed an attack that left on 2 mosques that left 51 people dead and 40 injured. And that doesn't count the indirect harms. Research shows that algorithms are not objective. They're written by humans and they have human bias embedded in their DNA. They actively reproduce and reinforce marginalisation. And now to my second point, that good regulation won't fix it. There are countless attempts globally to regulate our way out of this problem. In May 2016, the European Commission and 4 major online platforms announced a new code of conduct. In February 2019, the UK government announced it would fine social media companies that did not remove harmful content. Germany imposes fines of up to 50 million euros on social media companies that don't delete hate speech. And in Australia, we have a new Online Safety Act and furious legislative activity. Social media companies are being required to take action, but the problem continues to grow. The first speaker for the affirmative said we can design our way out of these problems, but we can't. Why? Because the problem lies with digitisation itself. As psychologist Mary Aiken reports, digitisation is changing human behaviour already. It changes how we perceive the world, how our brains develop, how we behave towards others, how we transmit social norms and values among a community, and of course, safety. These are not side effects, they are intrinsic. We're losing a sense of the collective. We're vulnerable. This is harming individuals, communities, and even democracy. Sure, the opposition will tell you there are good aspects to digitisation. This doesn't override the fact that taken as a whole, this medium is toxic. It's bad for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kath. Look, I have been swayed by both sides repeatedly. I am but a leaf in the breeze, I think, this evening. But the great news is, whilst everybody has very kindly called me the adjudicator, the decision is in your hands, ladies and gentlemen, not in mine. I will but report the results of the poll. There will be, hopefully on your screen at the moment, the Great Debate voting. There'll be a QR code. I know that got mentioned in the debate. I won't go into whether we're tracking or not. I don't think we are. We're just trying to get your vote for the purposes of this evening. Could you please avail yourselves of the technology at hand and vote? I think even the negative side may not think it's for the better broadly, but for the purposes of this vote, they would certainly like to have your vote. So please avail yourselves of the opportunity. We're going to give you 3 minutes to vote, and I'm going to, in a moment, introduce my great friend and colleague, Joe Holland, to give a bit of a summary and some thoughts on what's happened. I would like to say it was really interesting. We did a poll, and a number of people answered this before we started this evening, and it was very interesting. This is not to sway your vote as you make it now. Please make it unencumbered with this information, but there are 20% for the affirmative proposition. There were 35% for the negative proposition and 45% who are unsure. Now, we need no unsures when we get to the back end of this. There's a lovely pie chart on screen. Geez, I'm no good at technology. I couldn't do that quickly. Well done to the team behind the scenes tonight for making that appear so quickly. So grab your phone, make sure you've got that QR code. You're in the voting process and you get your votes in. There's probably a minute and a half or so to go, but I'm going to pass over to Joe Holland, my great friend and colleague, for a few minutes, so you have plenty of time to get those in. Great debate. That QR code's there now. Make sure you're availing yourself of that. But Joe, it is wonderful to be partnering and handing over to you as such a great friend of mine and of the Chambers here in Australia, the Chamber in the UK. Great to have you with us. Joe, over to you.
And thank you, David. And good morning from the UK and good evening in Australia. From the UK Australian Chamber of Commerce here in London, I'm delighted to be giving you some reflections on this fabulous event, which has explored and celebrated the relationship between Australia and the UK across the arts, creative industries, and higher education. Firstly, I'd like to thank and acknowledge the important role Professor Heather Zwicker has played as MC throughout both Part A and Part B of this event. And thank you to the panellists and presenters in Part A, David McCready, my good friend, OBE, on Part B, and he's soon to be announcing the winning team and his role as adjudicator. Keynote speaker, Professor Stephen Benford, the debaters' hard work with preparation and presentations, and the UQ Debating Society for coaching the teams. Now, reflecting on the debate, there were some very strong arguments for and against. Digitisation enhances our lives, health, learning, food production, interactions with others, and enhances our experiences, both good and bad, to improve understanding on a variety of situations. And the debate outlined many other positive aspects. However, digitisation can have a negative impact when it impacts the way we feel and takes away our choices. So in the future, more emphasis will need to be given to balancing these pros and cons, and there'll be many more debates on balancing the effects. Now, on the wider topic of this event, which has been brought to the audience by the partnership between UQ and the UK Government and Science Innovation Network, the partnerships between Australia and the UK have never been more important. This first free trade agreement for the UK and the 17th for Australia has been agreed and signed in record time. And the speed of this agreement demonstrates the desire of both countries to forge ahead and create a partnership that will greatly benefit them both. Academic institutions have an important role to play, and especially UQ, which has a long history and demonstrable track record in research and innovation. And this, combined with their global engagement, will create a deeper connection between the UK and Australian industries. Finally, thank you to the audience for your participation. I'm now welcoming back my good friend David McCready for his final comments and to announce the winning team. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe, and what a great summary. I mean, there's so many great points that I remember too from the debate this evening, and I wonder whether, going back to the comment I made earlier about King Canute, can we actually hold back this tide, the digitisation of everything? Whether you're for the affirmative or the negative, I worry that there is no holding it back. The tide will rise, and we will have to see where it takes us. That's probably to the next debate, which might be about climate change, but that's another story altogether. Let's bring it back to the debate this evening. It's been a wonderful, wonderful exposition of how people can think through a variety of different sides, and I'm pleased to be able to announce that we have a clear winner. Well, when you think about it, clear winners are interesting when you talk about percentages, but we won't go to Brexit. That's another conversation again. Look, tonight, the winner, in popular acclaim and by a margin that it means that I am able to say they are a clear winner this evening, is the negative team. Congratulations. With 53% of the vote, giving roundings 46% for the affirmative. Personally, I have to say, my impression coming into tonight was that, of course, digitisation is better. I can't do anything without having a mobile phone in my hand. So it must be great and supportive. But I have personally also been very much swayed by the negatives view. Although I have to say, Claire Sullivan's point that actually, if you say on balance, that it's only better, I have to say that did give me a little bit of a tweak towards the affirmative. So where did I wind up? Well, I didn't vote because it was just far too hard to split the teams tonight. Could I thank again all our speakers? Could I thank the UQ Debating Club who have spent some time coaching if they needed coaching, but giving them reminders of the formalities of debating and bringing this all together tonight. Could I thank UQ and everybody who's been associated with this, from the British government as well, Her Excellency Vicky Trudell, who spoke earlier, but also to the SIN team and Lara, but also the British Council. It's been a broad church that has brought this event together tonight, and I've been pleased to be a very small part of it. And I'm very pleased that I wasn't having to decide, as you could tell from my comments just now. Could I also very much acknowledge and thank again Jo Holland for her comments and wrap up. Again, it made me think on both sides of the argument, and I very much appreciate your support tonight, Jo, as well. We look forward to doing much more with you in partnership, as we already do going forward. It's now my great pleasure to hand back to our wonderful MC, as Jo said, through both sessions today and all the work of all the UQ team. From those on the outside of UQ, it's been an enormous effort, and thank you very much for all your support. But Heather, if I can pass back to you to wrap up the evening and to send us into the evening here in Australia and into our day in the UK with another great performance. But to you first, Heather.
Listen, thank you very much, David. And thank you to everybody who participated in that debate. Listen, here's the side that I think won. I think the side that won is the side that argued for Uber being able to use a sustainably produced digital device to order Uber Eats, which was paying drivers an equitable, fair wage with adequate health cover to come and deliver sustainably produced food grown by using digitally enhanced technology that then I would then be able to, pay for conveniently through those digital means and then consume with friends and family around me. I'm just saying, I would like to have it all. And friends and family, universally lovely people who would never be radicalized or be committing hate crimes online. I'm just saying that's kind of the team, that was the winning position that I was hearing emerge from this debate. Really proud of all of the work that you have done and really, really pleased with how the entire day has come together. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jo. And thank you, everybody who participated specifically in the debate and over the entirety of the day. I'd like to thank the University of Queensland and the UK government for hosting the event. I'd like to thank the Australian British Chamber of Commerce and the Australia United Kingdom Chamber of Commerce for your support, and a big thanks to all of the people who have worked behind the scenes for months to make this event a big success. Finally, a big thank you to all of our presenters and to you, the audience, for making today so enriching and engaging at the level of conversation, provocation, thought, and implication, because these conversations don't end today. We carry them with us into our evening here in Australia, into our day in Europe and the United Kingdom, and in London. Just so you know what happens next, the teams will be working hard to get both Part A and Part B up on YouTube in the coming days. Everyone who registered will get an email when this is uploaded, along with an event survey. We want to know how our work went over, so I do encourage you to provide meaningful feedback so that we can keep producing meaningful, topical, and stimulating events like this in the future. To bring today's program to an end, we have a very special performance. This work was created by Associate Professor Yves Klein, who's a senior lecturer in popular music and technology at the University of Queensland. Associate Professor Klein collaborates with festivals, scientists, artists, and researchers to develop cross-disciplinary performance experiences. Her work, Vocal Womb, is an example of this practice, and it's the first of its kind to deploy laryngoscopy during real-time performances for a live audience. Vocal womb allows its audience to explore the relationship between voice, identity, and power by stepping into and directly manipulating the voice of another. So I should probably give you a little bit of a content warning. If you're squeamish about images, medical images, and that kind of thing, just know that you will see some in this performance, but also you should know that if you are moved by beautiful opera singing, you're getting that as well. It's a really provocative piece and a bit full on. That performance, which is just about 5 minutes long, will bring the event to a close. So we'll run it and we'll let you exit when it is over. Thank you for joining us. And I really do hope that you enjoy Eve's work. I've certainly enjoyed my day with you. Good day to you over across the pond. Good evening to you here in Australia.
Hi everyone. I'm Associate Professor Eve Klein. I'm a music technologist and artistic researcher in the School of Music at the University of Queensland. I make large-scale public artworks experienced by hundreds of thousands of people around the world, mainly at festivals. I craft artworks by shaping sound and music with interactive technologies in playful ways. My process combines community engagement with interactive world building, and I utilize sound to create deep connections to places and people via this act of listening. Technological innovation lies at the core of each artwork because I'm curious about pushing the boundaries of audience experience and immersion. But importantly, each artwork is crafted collaboratively with researchers, community groups, festivals, cultural organisations and other NGOs. And we work together to better invite audiences to discuss solutions to real-world challenges. Art has great capacity to break down the barriers between us and engender empathy across difference. My artistic practice enables me to locate problems in the real world by talking with and working with communities, and my research practice enables me to investigate these problems and find radical new ways of opening up discussion with the broader public. And it's so that we can really reach change by navigating difficult conversations together in safe ways. Some of the artworks that have had these difficult conversations at the heart of them have explored topics like gendered and racial violence, climate change, refugee rights, and the impact of colonialism. Today, I'm going to share with you a taste of one of my more challenging works called Vocal Womb. This performance and installation work externalizes the hidden, fleshy, and deeply personal workings of the voice from inside a singer's body, from inside my body, in fact. Picture this. Participants sit across from an opera singer. She wears a laryngoscope, a thin viewing tube which passes through her nose and provides real-time video of her vocal cords projected into the performance space. Audio is captured from inside her body by contact mics placed on her skin, and you can hear the sound of her lungs inhaling and exhaling and her other internal organs gurgling with their everyday functions. Participants remix these signals and amplify them into the performance space, and in doing so, by externalizing what's so intimate and internal in this exaggerated and overwhelming sonic and visual experience, participants are asked to confront the contradiction of our voices, of how we culturally negotiate and wield this idea of voice to create a sense of our shared humanity. I hope you enjoy this taste of Vocal Womb.
Having dinner, Zach in his high chair sat across from me. Toothbrushes and balloons. Contractions, contractions, contractions. Reading stories.